welcome to Arbitral Insights, a podcast series brought to you by our international arbitration practice lawyers here at Reed Smith. I'm Peter Roscher, Global Head of Reed Smith's International Arbitration Practice. I hope you enjoy the industry commentary, insights and anecdotes we share with you in the course of this series, wherever in the world you are. If you have any questions about any of the topics discussed, please do contact our speakers. And with that, let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Arbitral Insight podcast series. And I'm delighted today to have as our guest the fabulous Dr. Kabir Duggal. Hi, Kabir.
Hey, Gautam, delighted to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. I've been looking forward to doing a podcast with you for a long time now. Many people will know Kabir, but I'm going to give you a little quick introduction to him. He has an incredibly varied and illustrious resume, so I'm going to try and do him justice by referring to it as briefly as I can. So, Dr. Duggal, which I'll avoid the temptation to call Kabir.
Yes, please.
Here
is how I go.
No, I'm
being reprimanded.
No, I'm just pulling your leg. Because I know I can. Because that's what it's like when I talk to you. I'm always a little mischievous. But Kabir is qualified in a number of jurisdictions. He's qualified to practice in New York, in Washington, D.C., England and Wales, where he's a barrister, and in India. He is a senior international arbitration advisor with Arnold and Porter in New York, and he has a very, very broad arbitration practice, specializes in international arbitration, in international investment treaty arbitration, and public international law. He sits as an arbitrator, a mediator, and he's also an academic. So I told you he's got an incredibly varied and illustrious resume. And he has, it's fair to say, a very international outlook on things. And you can sense that from where Kabir is admitted and the breadth of his practice. Apart from his work as an arbitrator, mediator, and as counsel, he's also a very passionate champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, something amongst many things which he and I have in common and which we will be touching upon in this podcast. So, Kabir, I hope that introduction did you justice and didn't sort of, embarrass you too much, but I had to try to get in a few of those things because it is an absolute delight to be speaking with you today.
Likewise.
Now, Kabir, tell me, how did you find law, or how did law find you?
Thank you, Gautam. I'm really delighted to be here. I will write you the check for all the kind words you have said later.
Oh, I look forward to it.
But it's a real pleasure to be here. I know we're going to be touching on some important themes that you mentioned, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Gautam, I got into law, I don't want to say by chance, but I got into law a little later in my career. And by that I mean I wanted to do something international. I grew up in the Middle East. I'm of Indian origin. So I was always internationally inclined. And I think I was attracted to foreign service or becoming a diplomat. And so I decided, I'm going to do management. I'll then try to figure out foreign service. And that's what I got into educationally. I was studying management. And you had to do classes in finance and accounting. And the realization hit me that this is super not interesting for me. And I think it was at that stage when I did sort of a personality analysis on my own. And I realized that law would be something interesting. It combines my passion for speaking, for writing. You really can make a difference. I realized at that stage that there could be an international aspect. No idea what any of that meant, but I realized you can do interesting things internationally with the law degree. And so that was sort of my foray into law. To all the youngsters listening, I would advise them not to do what I did. It is probably better for you to figure these things out a little earlier. And Gautam, I feel you would probably agree with me when we look at this new generation of lawyers coming
Hmm.
up.
Hmm.
There seems to be a lot more thoughtfulness than I think it was a generation before them. They seem to be a lot more
I
focused,
agree.
a lot more driven. So that's probably a good thing.
No, I agree with you, and I think, and I shudder to think how I would do if I was trying to get admitted into a law firm right now. Because I got admitted over 30 years ago. So I was thinking to myself, my goodness, how would I be able to replicate what some of these very, very well organized people do now, as you say? But your international background is really, I think it defines you in terms of what you do, Kabir, because
Yeah,
your upbringing, your exposure to different cultures,
yeah,
and the fact that you've worked in so many different places,
right.
and that really blends very well with what you do right now.
Right, exactly. Exactly. I mean, for all of us in this field, there is this commonality. We like meeting different people, we like different cultures, often we like trying different foods. That I think makes for a very good international arbitration lawyer because at our core, we like international things.
Oh, absolutely. And I even more convinced of this every time I do anything abroad, that you can't do what we do in the world of international arbitration unless you enjoy meeting people, you enjoy different cultures, you enjoy different legal traditions, and you enjoy different types of food. And that's
Right.
definitely one thing that you said. I completely agree with you, Kabir. So so then tell us then, sort of, so when law found you, right, which I guess is something which I think is the sort of sense of it all, which is great. Who has been, who's influenced you the most as a mentor or mentors in the course of your career to date?
Gotham, that is such a great question, but also such a hard question. Just because, I believe in life, one should have many mentors. I'm a very firm believer, and this is, I'm trying to weave in some pieces of wisdom based on my own life to the extent anybody wants it. But this is one of my very big suggestions, that is, have many mentors, have people who look and sound like you, have people who are completely different from you. I think we need both. So I have too many mentors to acknowledge. Now, I'll just share a couple of things where I feel mentors have been so instrumental in my life. Like I said, I got into law school wanting to do something international. And at Oxford and at NYU, I really trained to become an international human rights lawyer, something I deeply care about and something, that I still think is super important for us as lawyers. We graduate in the United States in May. So graduation's very soon going to come up for all the current students. In April, the realization hit me that I have to figure out a visa status if I have to stay in this country. And so I needed something permanent. And this is again realities of life, you have to be flexible, you have to see what makes sense. And I went to my professor at NYU who taught me international law, the very famous Professor Tom Frank. He passed away very unfortunately a year after I graduated. So I do feel I was very privileged to have the opportunity to study under him. And I just went to him and told him I don't know what to do with my life. The proverbial quarter life crisis at its worst. And he told me, there's this field arbitration. You may want to consider that since you're interested in international law. And, my student is the chairman of Curtis. Let me speak to him. And this is the year that Lehman collapsed, right? And nobody was hiring. It was a really stressful time in the US. And I get an interview on Thursday. I get the offer on Monday. And I'm told I can start as soon as I graduate.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
I can falsely say this was all me, but it was him. And this is where mentors really can be so instrumental in your life. Now, I have too many mentors, and I really risk omitting some of them, so I don't want to mention all of them. But all my mentors, I love you, and I'm forever grateful to you.
Now, that was a lovely way to put it, because we do have, I know I personally have many people that I regard as really fundamental to me and what I've done and what I intend to do.
Right.
And I think you're absolutely right about having that varied blend of people. And I think that's a theme we'll come back to when we delve into diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we'll come back to that, because that's also another very prevalent theme in all of that. So, in terms of then arbitration, right? That's something, as you just mentioned, sort of clicked in terms of an opportunity. Although I think you're being far too modest about yourself, because your merit is stratospheric. So you walked into that job because you deserve to. But tell me a little bit about how you branched into sort of the world of public international law and investment treaty arbitration, because that's, of course, become a very important area over the last sort of 20, 25 years or so. And, tell us a little bit more about how you came into that world.
Thank you, Gautam. I got into this field sort of by chance. And again, this is something which for your younger audience members, right, I feel they don't have the luxury of that, for better or worse. I have my interview, and the firm that I interview with, Curtis, at that stage was representing Venezuela. And this is in the mid 2000s, when investment arbitration was still relatively nascent. You've had your initial wave of Argentine cases, the decisions are just coming out. I will never forget this moment that in my interview, they ask me, "Do you know ICSID?" And I tell them, I do know ICSID. We had one class on ICSID when I did the BCL at Oxford. And it was like this amazing moment. This guy knows what he's talking about. I just compare that. Now we do 36 classes just on investment arbitration. So things have really changed. And this is sort of how I get into investment arbitration. We get into it largely from a state side. You're representing a sovereign. And I feel the resources were still so limited. You didn't have any of these big databases giving you cases. It was often people who had their secret little stashes. That's where you got the cases. You often were looking at treatises. So my public international law training, I think, came in very handy. It was a fun time. It was an exciting time. It was a nerve-wracking time. Right? Because often when you were asked questions, you didn't know, you didn't have this past case law to look at and try to justify what you were saying. So you were doctrinally trying to make the best argument you could. An exciting time, a time I think the younger generation is probably not going to have. I think the way our practices evolved, we expect you to have specialized academically. There's just a lot more drive. A lot of them write precisely on these topics. So it's just a different world.
No, I agree with you so much, Kabir, because I always did, from when I first qualified, litigation and arbitration.
Right.
But I did my first investment treaty case in 2002. And, it was a completely different world because, as you say, there wasn't much written about it
Right.
at that time. And I hadn't
Yeah.
studied that area as part of my legal studies. So it was a really sort of, as, our American friends, I'm speaking to you while you're in New York, would say, you're drinking from the fire hose in that sense, because you were literally at the sharp end of things. But it's fascinating, and as you say, it's sort of gone on to become such a incredibly much well structured area. But then let me move on to a slightly different thing.
Right.
Apart from your work as counsel and your academic pursuits, you regularly sit as an arbitrator. So I would like to ask you, first of all, if you share with our listeners how you first got to get appointed as an arbitrator and some of your reflections on what you as an arbitrator particularly like when you're sitting at the other end of the table and you're receiving submissions
Right.
and statements of case from the lawyers.
That's fantastic, Gotham. There's a lot here, so I'll try to do this. And feel free to catch me if I miss anything, because I do think this is a good question.
Yeah.
I think when you're starting off as an arbitrator, your initial cases are going to come from an institution. And a lot of institutions do see value in getting younger arbitrators in. I just make a small asterisk here. The institutions are often going to give you cases as a sole arbitrator. That's how you begin. Those cases are often small and by firms that don't do a lot of arbitration. And so those cases often tend to be complicated. And so it is, again, your fire hose analogy or baptism by fire. But that's how you're going to get your initial cases. Gautam, I think, it really boils down to your firm, and especially if you're in big law, whether your firm is amenable to you serving as an arbitrator and whether you can overcome conflicts and all the related problems. I have been, I think, lucky that my firm has allowed me to do this. At this stage, I'm only serving as an arbitrator. Double hatting is a very big problem, and I'm trying to avoid, I'm just trying to avoid any arguments in double hatting. So I'm only serving as an arbitrator right now. And it's a lot of fun. Now, if you like advocacy, if you like argumentation, you're probably not going to enjoy the arbitrator work too much. Uh, Arbitrators, in my humble opinion, should not be lawyers. And it is a very difficult thing when you see arbitrators trying to become advocates.
I think it's a very interesting point. Very interesting point.
But I think for the younger audiences, I think if you're thinking about an arbitrator profile, build your profile towards becoming an arbitrator. Write, speak, let institutions know you're ready to take appointments. And if you get the appointment, don't screw it up. Sometimes you see people, the senior associates who want these cases, they get it, and then counsel work comes in, and then the arbitrator work takes a back seat. It gives a bad name to the process when that happens. What would I like to see, Gautam? That's a great question, and I think you really, when you're sitting on the other side, realize frivolous arguments, but just these fairly endemic things in our practice, particularly in investment arbitration, but I think true generally, of very long, duplicative witness statements, cross examinations that are really not accomplishing anything, or just, bad behavior. Those are things that become very apparent to you as an arbitrator. And when you see counsel doing that, there's always this moment like, what are you doing? Why do you think this is effective or this is helping your case? So this would be my suggestion. I think zealous advocacy is a good thing. I think all of our legal traditions tell us act in the best interest of your client. But that doesn't mean you have to raise every stupid argument. Some amount of judicious thinking and some amount of, is this going to help us? Is this relevant to the big picture, or are we fighting about pennies? Some of that kind of analysis, I think, would just help arbitration retain its original purpose of being effective, of being quick, of being cost sensitive, things that we're losing.
Now, I couldn't agree with you more. You've really summarized my thoughts entirely. I'm a big fan of brevity,
right,
and simplicity,
right,
and avoiding too much showboating.
right.
No, there's no point in it at all. It's just pointless. No, thank you for that. That's very, very, again, very, very insightful. And I just want to move on to a slightly different area now, which is something we touched on in the course of the introduction, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You're one of very few ethnically diverse, prominent arbitrators. And there should be a lot more like you. Things are changing, and they'll change more. But there's no doubt there's not enough people who are diverse from an ethnic point of view,
right,
or who are diverse from a gender point of view.
Correct.
And there is a lot of more scope for change. And you and I, amongst other things, have the pleasure of being on the advisory board of Indian Women in International Arbitration.
Correct.
Again, we are both passionate supporters of women.
Correct.
And I just wonder, because you are such a wonderful supporter of diversity, equity, and inclusion, I wonder whether you could share your thoughts as to what more we can all do and what more the institutions can really do to really embrace this and not just say, yep, it's important, but now we're going to really make something happen. We're going to effect real change. I wonder if you could just share some thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, Gautam. And, let me just begin by acknowledging all the good work you are doing in this space. I think it is important for everybody in this space to be talking about DEIB issues. And I think, as you said, it's good for us to be talking about all forms of diversity. Both of us are men. But I think we have a very important role to be talking about gender issues along with women. I don't think we ever want to talk over them. That is not the idea. But to be equal supporters and partners, because these are societal issues and we all have a role to change it. Gautam, how do we move the needle? And I think there are a couple of things that need to be done. I think the first thing is we need to recognize diversity can take a variety of forms. And our community has, I think, very rightly identified gender and for the past few years, ethnic diversity. But when we're talking about diversity, there are so many visible and non-visible forms of diversity that often don't get spoken about, right? Mental health, LGBTQ rights, socioeconomic rights, age, language, right? All of these are realities that we need to be thinking about, and we need data on them because that helps us see where we are headed. I mean, I think some of the recent gender reports that came out actually show a decline in numbers. So, I think we had moved from the 8, 9 about 10 to 15 years ago to close to 20-25%. But we're seeing a slight backtracking on gender. For some of these forms of diversity, we don't have data. Like most institutions give us data on nationality, which is a very misleading data in both of our countries, for example, right? If you say British,
Absolutely.
it's not getting the nuance of a British Asian person's experience, which may be much more challenging than a Anglo-Saxon white British person. So I do think we need more granular data. LGBTQ rights, I mean, I think institutions are so cautious recognizing the international practice that they don't even want to get data on some of these things. So I think the more data we have, the better things are going to be. Gautam, I also do think we need to be getting the clients, not lawyers, to talk about diversity. Because a lot of companies, as a part of their corporate mandate, have diversity, inclusion, and equity, belonging as core themes. Now, when a lawyer is put in an arbitration dispute, they want to win. Diversity takes a back seat. I don't want to say they forget it, but the winning is the core priority. And that often means we are going to hire people who look like us, people we know, since decision makers in most big law firms tend to look a particular way, arbitrators tend to look a particular way. I think the more we're able to get general counsels involved in the decision making, the more we are going to see change. Institutions have done a pretty good job. They see systemic issues and they see survival much better. It is a complex issue. We are a reflection of society. And so all the problems in society we're going to find in our practice, even if we don't acknowledge them. But I think some of these would be small efforts to try and change things. All these amazing organizations trying to put a spotlight on different forms of diversity. Again, a good and positive thing. Hopefully, the generation under us, Gotham, doesn't probably have to go through the kinds of things I think you and I would have faced. Which may not
Yeah.
it may always not be overt, but you feel the difference in standards,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
feel you are subject to different requirements. So hopefully, we make it easier for them.
Well, absolutely. I think that's really the big thing. It's sort of people like us and others, and we know who we're talking about,
Right,
have a big role to play because we're hopefully enabling those who come after us to have the benefit
right,
of
right.
all the obstacles and barriers and
Right.
other obstructions
Correct.
that we had, but which bit by bit are being moved away. So and I really want to say, I mean, you being who you are and doing what you do, and the example you set is immense because, as I say, there aren't many arbitrators who have your profile, and I think it really is a wonderful thing to see you flourishing so much, and I look forward to more and more from you because you really are an absolute role model for so many people.
Thanks,
Um,
Gautam. And I just to echo that, I hope both of us can see many more people who look different and who sound different and are getting this opportunity to flourish. I think both of us would be, I think, what we would define as success. I'm speaking on your
Absolutely.
behalf.
No, you're right. That's what success would look like
Yeah.
for sure. No, but thank you. I mean, it's such a wonderful day. It's been so great to talk to you about these issues and about how you got to where you've got to and those who've supported you. Now, we're coming, alas, to the end of the podcast, but we always end our podcast with a bit of light-hearted discussion. And Kabir, this is no exception.
Right.
We are going to maintain that tradition here, right? So
That's amazing.
and this actually, so many of our listeners love this segment, right? They of course love hearing the incredibly uplifting stories that our guests have, and you are no exception. But they love the next segment, which is much more lighthearted and nothing to do with law, right?
Right.
Or practice or arbitration or anything like that. So the first thing, what's your favorite sort of music, your favorite band or singer?
Gautam, this is a very tough question because I think I'm very temperamental. And based on my mood, there's different kind of music that I like to listen to. Just one thing, as somebody who's now in different jurisdictions, one thing I consciously try to do is try to listen to music either from the Middle East or from South Asia. Because I feel for me, that is one way to connect to different places that have played a very big part in my life, and you don't lose the language. So there's some connection, so that's what I would say. Music from the Middle East or from South Asia.
It's a great choice. I mean, I can tell you, having grown up with South Asian music, amongst other things, from when I was a young boy, I could identify with that very much so. Then what about, let's move to film. What about your favorite sorts of film? And do you have a favorite film?
Gautam, I don't watch a lot of movies. So this is, again, a very tough one. I've never been very, very deep into movies. If I have to watch movies, the two genres that I would generally select, they're either going to be, and they're completely polarizing. So this is where you can see the craziness that sometimes we tend to have in us. I will either watch movies on history, which is, I think, one of my big passions in life, or I'm going to watch slapstick comedies. So those are the two genres.
They're brilliant. Two brilliant genres that are very different, but are both very appealing as well. One expands your mind, one expands your humor, which is all great. Okay, now the last question, because you are an international man. Many would say an international man of mystery. So tell us if you've got a favorite travel destination or place that you love to visit.
Gautam, again, these are very hard questions because, we love traveling and, there are so many cities and so many countries that I think are absolutely beautiful. I just got back from one country, a country that I think people don't think about a lot. And it was one of the most spectacular places to have visited. And it's the country of Uzbekistan. And I really would urge everybody, Google the cities of Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva. Because they're unbelievably beautiful cities. Some of them go back centuries. They were the heart of the Silk Road. They were at one stage in their history the centers of learning and civilization. And I really do recommend it. Even though as a vegetarian, I had a very hard time in Uzbekistan. It's still the history, the culture, the people more than made up for just eating pizza every night.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I can imagine how tough it must have been for you as a vegetarian in Uzbekistan. I remember, I'll just tell you very briefly, over the years, amongst other places, I've had the great privilege of having been to Mongolia twice on work, right, and to Kazakhstan a few times on work. And those are also countries not for vegetarians. Right. But they are wonderful countries. And I shall definitely put Uzbekistan on my to-do list, because I've not been there yet. But thank you so much, Kabir. It's been an absolutely delightful discussion with you. Thank you very much for taking the time. And I just want to end by saying I look forward to seeing you in person very, very soon. We're doing this podcast with me in the UK, you in the US, and I very much look forward to seeing you in person very, very soon. All the best, and thank you again.
This has been so much fun, Gautam, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
Arbitral Insights is a Reed Smith production. Our producer is Ali McCardle. For more information about Reed Smith's global international arbitration practice, email arbitralinsights@reedsmith.com. To learn about the Reed Smith Arbitration Pricing Calculator, a first-of-its-kind mobile app that forecasts the costs of arbitration around the world, search Arbitration Pricing Calculator on reedsmith.com or download for free through the Apple and Google Play app stores. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Stitcher, reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at ReedSmith LLP on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers. All rights reserved.